So a question came up for me during the week a little bit. I normally like to ask like meditation questions, but this is a little bit different. So it feels like for me to continue operating in the regular world and our culture, like I have to maintain a certain level of deviousness to connect with people and to operate effectively in the world. And it's difficult because I do the four measurable practices and I've done a lot of work to like consider other people's point of view and to give up my own needs for the sake of others. And 90% of the people aren't doing that. And so they'll just take advantage of that. And so I feel like I have to maintain or cultivate or be very wise in terms of seeing other people's maybe less capacity to do that. And not that I'm super egoless, but I'm probably just less than a lot of people who are not doing these practices. And so, I don't know, it feels like I need to cultivate or maintain a sense of deviousness or an understanding of other people's, or maybe my own, just to connect with most people. And it conflicts with the four measurables, seemingly.
Mm-hmm. I understand your question in the abstract, but I don't actually understand sort of as a practical example.
Yeah, I mean, I can name any maybe example. I'm weary to say the actual examples.
The word devious is interesting. Without examples, I just have to read all kinds of things into it. To look in the bottom of my cup and see if I can read the tea leaves. But since there's no tea in here, I don't have much to go on. But the general, this is kind of a refrain, kind of a similar flavor I've heard in questions before. Comes up in various guises, the sense that, well, if I'm just really a nice person, I'm going to lose big time. So, how do I get away with being a nice enough person from the Dharma perspective? Well, the answer is you don't. You don't actually get away with it. But I think it's, this is something that I think takes more exploration. That there's a certain point where we, I think, will find that what we think of as being a nice guy, or what we think of as being an improvement, trying to, it's maybe it is an improvement, but it's not really the whole deal. So we're not actually able to really see what it would be to be a nice guy. What it really would be to actually act in ways that actually really provided some opening for others. It's one thing to give people the impression that we're nice people and kind of reduce the friction. And But if we only define being a nice guy by having sort of shaved off enough rough edges and given a good impression, and then we take it farther and farther that like, well, I'm not going to do anything that disturbs anybody. Whatever other people's circumstances are, I'll just sort of shrink away from the situation. Then that recipe for being a nice guy really doesn't work. It is in itself it's a very egotistical projection, actually. We place such a high value on being, quote, a nice guy, that we do all these kinds of things to follow this recipe, but it's really being done in order to be me. I'm a nice guy. But that's not really what bodhicitta is about, exactly. And so there is, I think, a real challenge, a long-term challenge in seeing what it is to be actually honest in ways that are not they're not the flip side of it. Well, on one side, I'm going to be sort of dishonest about so that I can appear like a really nice person. On the other side, well, I'll be honest, kind of regardless of what impacts it actually has. I'll just tell somebody, actually, you're just really boring, you know? I'm just being honest. These poles are really that's not the work. It's much more subtle than that. And without actually kind of hearing an example, it's actually hard to say, well, in that situation, step back and look this way. The two choices or the three choices that you thought you had are not actually the choices. They're embedded in something that's actually kind of off the mark. So I don't think it's actually necessary to be devious to get along in the world. If you want certain kinds of goodies in the world, and you want them from certain people, well, that's a different question than really getting along in the world. And so if you want dope from the mafia, that's kind of a setup there. If that's what it means to get along in the world, I'm using sort of course, an extreme example. But we really have to see what do we really mean when we say get along in the world. And sometimes we find that a certain kind of openness and directness that we think, oh well, I'm just going to get completely taken advantage of here, it may work out in a completely different way. But the notion that kind of being an ordinary nice person carried to just kind of to an extreme is just it is a recipe for things not working out, because it's a preconceived notion of what the nice guy is. It's not actually working effectively with the situation. It's not really meeting the situation. It's preconceived. Part of the problem is that we want to know it's going to work out before we try it. And we don't get that luxury.
Okay. I want to ask about the bowing.
Mm.
The very beginning, as people come in.
Mhm.
So I don't do it. It makes me uncomfortable. It feels akin to worship, and I'm fairly certain that I'm looking at it in the wrong way, maybe coming from just a very different background. So I'd kind of like to know, what is the bowing when we come in? What is the mindset you, or anyone really, has when you bow before taking your seat?
Well, it's a practice. It's a practice. It's engaging physical activity. When we enter a place of practice, we need to somehow quite shift gears. And we need to do that kind of completely. Our physical activity, our speech, our mental activity, all should be kind of turned. And in this culture, we tend to separate physical activity and other things. It's kind of like, the body's just kind of sitting around, and the mind and the speech are doing things. And sometimes we make too much out of physical activity, and sometimes we denigrate it completely. And the notion of kind of the division of body and spirit is part of what goes on. But the practice, when the bowing, it's actually the symbol is with body, speech, and mind. I turn my full attention to the Dharma. I take refuge.
I've kind of always had a bit of trouble with this, and I've been working on trying to figure out practices to really work towards doing this, but I have a very hard time of letting go of random resentments, or whatever it could be, past, or any sort of frustrations or anything, and I can hold on to it really stupidly. Like, there's this one neighbor who wrote on his garbage can that he has on the sidewalk that he doesn't allow people to throw dog poop in his garbage, and that just pisses me off. Like, then just move your garbage can, But nonetheless, but that's a small thing, but like it can be larger than that, and in so many various ways that it's hard for me to just be able to set something aside, even for a moment, or an evening, to be able to not feel resentful when I look at the situation and be able to deal with it in a more mindful manner. I'm trying to figure out, like, I feel like I'm always kind of stuck, feeling like I don't know what to do with that resentment, and I imagine a lot of people have similar problems. So.
Yeah. Part of it is the particulars of that, of how resentments and those kinds of patterns, that particular sort of style of reacting. There's some things internal to that. But in a more general way, all our patterns are very kind of there are patterns. They're repeated, and we do cultivate grooves that we react and think and behave in ways that are very habitual. And in the middle of it, it seems like, well, I have no idea how this could be any different, not even one little bit different than it is right now. I've told myself this story, and it's right. And I've told it again, and yeah, that's right. And I tell myself, no, really, I was right. And again, and again, and again, and again. And then we have the next thing comes along. And then we have the pattern of how we cultivate this pattern that we repeat. And so, just in general, that's kind of a lot. That's a lot of what Dharma practice is about, is seeing that we do press the repeat button. We have our finger on it. And that's actually sort of, given that we have our finger continually on the repeat button, that's what happens, is we keep repeating. And we don't see that that's the kind of the key thing. It's not that this natural pattern just is so right and automatic, and how could anybody else in the world see something any other way? The thing that we're not seeing, we don't actually see how it is that we hold our finger on the button. We just don't see it. And reciting to ourselves all the very excellent reasons that we have for why so-and-so shouldn't do or shouldn't say or think or do whatever it is that they're doing that we find so obnoxious. Just reciting that over and over again doesn't get anywhere. So there are all kinds of practices, but part of them is really to actually really truly cultivate some capacity for understanding some other story, really considering that there might be another perspective. And also considering that if in fact everybody thought exactly the way I did, that things would actually turn out really badly. We actually think, if my mother used to say, if I was Tsarina, she had this wonderful imperial power. She would change everything, then everything would be, okay. It's like Marie Antoinette, I think at the end of her life, would not say, that's not the only thing you need. It doesn't work out so well. So being able to cultivate the ability to see other perspectives and really take them to heart and think, oh, well, somebody else, in this case, or the person with the garbage can, that person has their own patterns. And they also have their finger on the repeat button. And if we can actually begin to even understand not just the logic of their story, which may just trigger us to go back into our debate, but if we can actually just notice, really take seriously, there's another person just like me with their finger on the repeat button. To take that seriously, we actually have to see it in ourselves. We really have to experience the turmoil and the confusion that comes from that pattern. And this is actually the why. I think it's sometimes you'll hear very often that will come up like, first you have to cultivate compassion for yourself. And it sounds kind of formulaic, like, well, we put this as number one. Number one, compassion for this. Then number two, compassion for others. Okay, well, I'll do number one because it's a number one. It's not a number one just because it's not like some moral thing. It's not some order in the universe, but it's a practical matter. Until we actually experience the way that we cause our own suffering, until we actually experience that, the notion that we're actually going to think and behave and engage with others with real compassion, it won't happen. It will just be a slightly nicer version. It'll be the nice guy version of me holding my finger on the button, but it will still be about me. So I'll be really compassionate and tell this guy who has this problem with his garbage can about just how his life would be better if he just got over it.
But he's not going to listen.
Yeah.
He's got his finger on the button, and
Yeah, he's got his
he
finger.
won't even notice. Like, his hand's numb. It's just like
Yeah,
that's
just
what
like
all of our hands are
just
numb.
like
Yeah.
we all have. Our hands are all full of Novocaine.
Yeah. It's like,
What about?
I didn't even know I had a hand.
So that really seeing how deeply ingrained our patterning is and how trapped we are is a real first step. It's kind of that's a real it's actually a practical prerequisite to deep compassion. And it's also helpful to actually listen to other people's stories and to hear them really in a kind of without having, at least without saying but, every half sentence, and without thinking but every half sentence, to actually really be able to listen, to hear what other people's experience is. That's very important too. But it's hard to do that in a really deep way unless we've actually, you could say, unless we've actually really listened to ourselves. Listen to ourselves in a way that's not wrapped up in the story that we're telling. It's very gradual. This is not, take 2 aspirin and it'll be gone. You could say this is the essence of the engine of samsara. And and the rejoicing in being able to take our finger off the button for a moment. We should actually rejoice deeply in all that. Each one of those, each moment is actually sort of proof of concept that enlightenment is possible. We wish it was like 2 + 2 = 4, and once we get it, it's done, but it's 2 always turns into 3 and 1, and then with the addition. It's moment by moment. Right.
Can I add maybe to the question, or something that came up for me was just pressing play on our habitual responses to people. And you mentioned, well, if I were to talk to this neighbor, he wouldn't hear me because he's having his finger on the button too, right? And that might be true, I think, but he's definitely not going to hear you if you have your finger on your button. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're somehow able to take your finger off the button and talk and act out of some other space other than your habitual response, there actually might be a chance that he does listen. Because my experience is that our habitual tendencies are not formed in a vacuum. Like, they're formed in response to other people's patterns. So it's also been my experience that if I'm acting out of my habitual patterns, it just seems to feed the whole game of pressing our buttons in general. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're reaching over and pressing the other person's button.
Yeah, yeah. It's like It's like we're just propagating the whole button pushing game itself, you know?
It's as though our idea of the conversation is, may I reach over and press your button?
Yeah, hold up your button. Here.
Then could you press mine, please? No, all right, okay. Now we're actually having a conversation. But actually just listening first is a rather powerful thing. To listen first without feeling that, like, actually that somehow we've lost or the order of the universe is compromised if we don't set it straight now. So, yeah.
I have a question about the nice guy.
Yeah, all right.
What do I do with my habits of being the yes man, of the pushover, the pattern of someone's bothered by some activity I'm engaging in. I need immediate responses to somehow alter my actions to either to stop or to keep doing it intentionally, basically, depending on the situation. Either be the yes man or to not hear.
Yeah. The yes
find
man
this
and the no man.
I find it especially difficult to do anything but be the yes man at work, working with the kids I work with.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much
Yeah.
demands. My job is listening to demands of children, and it's pretty. It's easier to just push the yes man button and hold it down all day than to actually try and see what's going on in the moment with these beings, because I just want them to shut up.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes works.
That's not easy. We were just as annoying when we were children.
I certainly was.
Well, it's not a binary situation. That's the first thing.
Kind of like the nice guy versus the honest guy thing.
Yeah, it's not kind of this one or the other. And so there is the experiment to run, and trying to create a little space for surprising yourself and seeing what happens. Listening in a way that you didn't listen before. And then to open a little bit. In small little bits. Without expecting that it's going to be a recipe for the kids to be just stop being annoying, or for you to stop being annoyed. It's very step by step. And it would be really wonderful if circumstances like the one that you're working in now were staffed with people who had for generations trained deeply in working with a situation in something that's something other than just chaos control. But you may be the first person to actually start the experiment.
That's daunting.
Yeah, it is. But that's where we are with these things. Because we have to take some step, and then we see. And it's kind of veering in the direction of kind of the open-heartedness, veering in the direction of actually well-wishing towards the kids, towards the other beings. Like see what it is. Because just like the nice guy thing, it's easy for us to have a preconceived idea of what that would be. And you've described one of them, which is whatever.
Whatever you want.
It's not exactly the yes man. It's the kind of whatever, whatever. And that doesn't actually contribute that much. So we actually have to figure out what we can contribute, and that's really a life's work right there. So the notion that we're going to somehow get it done, hand in the paper, get the degree, and then we can kind of
Let life do its thing without us being
we
able
just
to
then we just take our foot off the accelerator and cruise downhill for the rest. It's not like that. So it's life's work. But if we have that kind of perspective, or even multiple lives' work, kind of the bigger the perspective, the more we can maybe just relate to. Okay, I'm going to try planting this seed, see how it works, see what happens. Plant another one. The theme that I started out with, the theme of kind of taking every moment as kind of really just meeting each moment as kind of a place of great richness, and being able to really give credit to just being there. We have to do the same thing in our relative circumstances. We meet a moment. And our expectation or our wish that it would just all kind of cruise smoothly after, we got the one nice pitch, we hit it, went over the fence, done. It's not like that. So, but that moment by moment, situation by situation. And in the process, there's kind of, what am I bringing? What am I bringing? Where do I have just, is there a moment when I could actually sort of, do I see how it is that I'm holding my finger on the button, and just take it off for a moment? That's ideally what, not ideal, that's a big piece of what we do with calm abiding meditation. You could say, in a certain way, the experience of the breath is like installing a very kind of a neutral corner button. You just kind of touch that button and let the other things go. And in just touching that, the other patterns, they can flow by. We realize we're actually not stuck.
I don't like that extra shift key on the keyboard. You can just kind of doesn't really need to be there. But it's the neutral one. It's the you can just push it and then nothing really happens.
Yeah, and by gum, I've got a button to push there. I can push the neutral button.
I remember reading something Chogyam Trungpa said, which is really quite idealistic, but he said, if you can, it would be good for you guys as Sangha members to start your own business with other Sangha members, essentially. Because I'm thinking about this nice guy thing, and for me, there's a lot of tension in giving that up at work, because I'm doing a lot of customer service. There's a lot of tension because, right when I'm not doing my nice guy act, there's I've been that's when there's a fear of being rude, while you dissemble yourself and try to find another approach. So it's an ongoing, it's over a long period of time you learn how to gradually shift if you are, and it's more just replacing habit with another habit that might be a little better, but it's there's really a tension, it's wow, I want them to like me because I want to feel okay. It's I want to be that nice guy, and if I don't, it's you feel rejection, and I think that's really hard, especially really hard for me. So I can relate to that predicament. I don't know if I got it right, but anyway, So I'm like, yeah, it'd be awesome to work with Sangha where like there's this new order and the work environment supports it as opposed to just pushing old patterns on you. Like, be nice, like, smile. Like, it'd be really cool to work with other Sangha members and like start a new business and do it your own way. You know, a real way. Yeah. It's kind of idealistic.
Sally?
Yes.
After many, many years working together, does it turn out like, oh, it's really the new way? I think there's, in a certain way.
It is a new way,
It
but
is a new.
it's really not what you think it's going to be.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's not.
Yeah, okay.
It's not harmonious and smooth.
No.
Uh,
The
but
bar has been raised, and so the pain of knocking it off is that much greater.
But it is true. You can, like, having volunteered in different roles over the years at KCC, I've definitely had the experience of being in a role that pushes my buttons. It brings all the same things up that I might encounter in a different context. And I happen to be working with somebody who, when it blows up, we actually go back and try to work on it. Now, you know, we have a shared tool to use to try to do our best and to try to be compassionate with one another. So it's not that it goes smoother, but maybe it's just there's some support for not giving up.
Yes, yes. I would say that's the key.
And that's really helpful.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And really
it's
helpful.
really hard, and I think I would say that I only really grasped that after many, many years, that the notion that actually it was the not giving up that was really kind of the key to it. That's what actually made it possible for things to fall away. And say, no, actually, no, we're still here, and we're still here because we essentially made the commitment not to give up. And that's a very key phrase within the Bodhisattva vow, not to give up on beings. And so that's actually one of the more kind of miraculous things in working in Dharma communities. It's not that it goes smoothly, but if you really do have an opportunity to not give up, you have that opportunity.
I think there's also more of a shared sense, an acknowledgement of, dukkha, suffering, and that this life isn't perfect, and so you don't have to say, well, it was going to be perfect except you did this thing. It's like we actually know, we've been studying and kind of noticed that it's not going to be perfect. And so we have our little prayer we're saying now of differences in ways of doing things will arise. And we don't need to make them into conflicts. And that's really, that little shared understanding is a little bit different, isn't everywhere in the world, but that is at least that much comes there. But that doesn't mean that differences in ways of doing things won't arise.
Yeah. We actually modified that prayer. Originally came from Venerable Chögyam, and it said differences in ways of doing things may arise. Just will. I thought let's just get right down to it.
Let's be real.
But it is actually. Trungpa Rinpoche did encourage people to do things, engage in endeavors like that, because it was a crucible. It was a crucible for engaging in practice, and also it was a crucible, and particularly the business thing with him. It was a crucible for like engaging in the world in a very practical way, where you had you had this bottom line financial thing. Were you going to make this work? Were you actually going to make it work, not just have a cool idea about things? So there's something to that. That was one of the things that Lama Drupchu told us about Kala Rinpoche's prerequisites for a 3-year retreat. Said you had to learn Tibetan, and you had to come up with the money for the retreat, and you had to finish Ngondro. You had to finish the foundation practices, which are a real time and energy commitment. And it's kind of easy to say, oh, if you're doing this intensive practice, that's good preparation for doing a retreat. A lot of intensive practice. And learning Tibetan, obviously practical. But Lama Drupchu, he said, actually, the learning Tibetan, in order to do that, you have to have a certain amount of kind of ability to organize yourself mentally and to study and really apply yourself and to understand this different framework for expressing ideas. So it required a certain kind of mental horsepower to do that, which was you really need to have that in order to kind of work with the material that's presented in 3-year retreat. And doing the Ngondro, it wasn't just doing intensive practice, it was being able to stick with a commitment, to take something on and really kind of see it through. Something that's challenging and not easy, it's not entertaining. Ngondro is like 2% entertaining 4 times over and 98% all kinds of other stuff. But the entertainment value is really small. And working through all that, you have to not give up on that in order to get to it. But the money part of that was being able to just have a kind of an ordinary kind of being able to take care of yourself in the world. And so that, I think, was something that Trungpa Rinpoche, in his encouragement of people to engage in businesses, to like take on a business, start a business, he was encouraging people to kind of really kind of stand on their own feet in the world in kind of a grounded way, and really be able to work in that environment. So that's we often. People often think, oh, gee, well, what would be a real kind of a dharmic career? I just finished college, so I want to go into this dharmic career. And a lot of people will they'll obviously think of something like counsel, some kind of personal service, something like that. But I think it's actually necessary to have a much wider view of what is really kind of a dharmic activity. And just having a business, being able to do that, being able to provide a service, being able to model a kind of a level of coherent activity in the world and do it in a way that really reflects the spirit of your practice. I think that's, no matter what it is. For a while, I used to answer the question. People say, oh, I just finished college. What should I do? I would say, you should be an investment banker. I was doing it partly to be annoying.
The investment banking industry needs more Dharma practitioners.
It definitely does. It definitely does. All kinds of activity in our society need more Dharma practitioners.
Yeah.
I know several of you are entrepreneurial sorts. Self-employed, soon to be self-employed.
Self-unemployed.
Self-unemployed, yeah.
I've done that.
good to feel like whatever we're doing, that there is a way that we can actually embody some aspects of our practice in that work, and it actually can be a reflection of that, and not that there's some kind of ideal dharmic job and everything else is kind of a cut below. That's really important.
Otherwise, we'd all be monks, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we'd all be one thing, except for everybody who couldn't do that, who would all feel terrible. We'd have the perfect people and the terrible people.
Well, I mean, I agree, but like the other side of me pops up, like I guess because I'm in that position you're talking about, I've thought kind of the very same thing, and like, I mean, we come to this Dharma center with the intention of gauging in activities, like we take refuge with our bodies, like that's an activity, that's not just any activity, it's Dharma, right? So it's like if you want to do Dharma in the real world, like you know, do your practice in the morning, set your intention, make all those activities that you do through the day, like bring people to enlightenment, you know, but at the same time, like we do have something like a religious order, like we do have religious activities, so it's like when I think of what I want to do and if what matters to me most would be Dharma, then like you would want to think seriously about that, right? Anyway, and I just consider for myself, I'm just not able to see the merging of the conventional ultimate, so I still reify, okay, this is what's meaning, this Dharma thing, activity, I depend on and need. It's like, of course you can't figure out what's meaningful because you, never mind, I'm just rambling. I would like
exactly.
to like have a meeting with you because I don't know what I want to do and I want help.
That's quite possible.
Okay, cool.
That's quite possible.
Deal.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're rambling at all. It is. We do have to really consider like our own capabilities and think about what kind of options really work. But I think it's important for us to start first by applying, not thinking that what we're doing is actually not, is kind of inadequate raw materials, that it's really not good enough. If we start there, then we may actually see something about what it is, what it takes for us to engage the Dharma in our life. And it doesn't matter whether we're on long retreat or in a monastic order or out in the world, we're still going to have to engage the Dharma in our life. And Bokar Rinpoche, I remember a conversation Dora and I had with him. He was talking about people kind of taking an extreme view of what real practice was, and thinking, oh well, renunciation, you just like, so I'm going to give up my job, I'm going to leave my family and go off, and he said, well, and 3 months later, they've left the Dharma, now they have no family connections, they don't have no job. It's just this kind of throwing themselves into something. It's kind of like, well, what's the most extreme sport I can engage in? See, why? But that process of actually, if we actually see something about what it takes to engage the Dharma in whatever activity that we're currently engaged in, that will actually be the foundation for seeing something about what it would be to engage the Dharma in other circumstances, ones that we would think are, quote, more ideal. Lama Tinley would say, oh, well, it must have been so easy and wonderful in the monastery that everybody's all, they're all holy and everything. No, there are people there too. There are people there, and differences in ideas and ways of doing things will arise. If you're on retreat, differences in ideas and ways of doing things will arise. And perhaps then it's like, oh crap, they just closed the gate for 3 years. So figuring out how you actually work with others, how you relate to your own circumstances, that's actually really key.
But increasing your formal practice, figuring out ways to be able to do that and do periods of retreat that
Yeah.
lead to, and then you can kind of see if more retreat seems reasonable. I mean, where you're not jumping off the cliff right away, but you're sort of step by step expanding into more practice. That's a very reasonable approach.
It's the difference between careful spelunking to explore a cave and bungee jumping. You actually have to go at it step by step, as opposed to just think, I'll go over the edge, and it'll all be done. So,
By his virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
thank you all.
Thank you.